Well, gentlemen, why don't you tell us a bit about your organizations and the boards you're working with? Bob, you want to take it first?
Sure, I'd be pleased to. So I work at the Cleveland Foundation, which is the community foundation serving Cleveland and 3 counties of Northeast Ohio. We're a pretty well-established organization. We've been around just more than 100 years, and actually we're the first community foundation established anywhere in the world, and are pleased to be the model for the growth of the field around the United States and now around the world. Over time, our board structure has changed from 5 in the beginning to 15 now, with a variety of positions, some appointed by external stakeholders, such as the mayor of the city of Cleveland, and others self-selected by the board through a kind of more traditional board governance committee process. And they really oversee all our work, from fundraising to our leadership work in the community to obviously what we're best known for, which is our grant-making work. So, Michael, I'd be interested to hear how you position your board and your organizational history and mission.
Well, thanks, Bob. Boy, what a great contrast in a couple of ways with your foundation. I'm responsible for leading the team at the Greater Minneapolis-St. Paul Regional Economic Development Partnership, which we call Greater MSP. Unlike your foundation, we're a very young organization. Our communities leaders discovered about 5 or 6 years ago that we were probably the largest metropolitan area in the United States that did not have a synthesized and organized economic development partnership at a regional economic level, within a major metropolitan area. So we formed the organization just 5 years ago, and we are a 501c3. So we have this responsibility of educating not only our own community but national and global audience about our region and the opportunities for growth and prosperity in our region. And our mission is very simply to increase new capital investment and job creation in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area to ensure the prosperity of both businesses and residents of our community. Our board of directors is public, private, and institutional. So we are a public-private partnership. About 85% of our board and our funding comes from private sector sources, and the remaining 15 to 20% comes from cities and counties. And we have on our board, in addition to most of the CEOs of our 18 Fortune 500 headquartered companies in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, we have mayors of our largest cities and county commission chairs from our counties, as well as our institutional leaders. Much like the foundation community, we include the CEOs of our major foundations and educational institutions, University of Minnesota, for instance. So that's the makeup of our board and our mission area.
Now, Michael, what's the size of the budget? I don't think you mentioned that, but
it's we're at $6 million annual revenue to perform the tasks that we have, which are, establishing strategy, marketing our region on a national and global scale, and coordinating the economic development projects that occur from our work.
So you're a very substantial nonprofit.
Yeah, sure.
And Bob, I don't think you mentioned the size of the foundation, but I believe the Cleveland Foundation is the 3rd or 4th largest in the United States, right?
Well, yeah, and we are a very large community foundation. We're slightly more than $2 billion in assets, and we do rank in the top 4 or 5. Obviously, it depends upon the individual day, but for a community the size of Cleveland, we're a very substantial foundation.
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen. And now let's get to the heart of the matter. You hear so much these days in the nonprofit world about the importance of building and maintaining really solid relationships with what we call stakeholder organizations. Let's define that fairly broadly as any organization that makes sense for your nonprofit to maintain a relationship with because something is at stake. Why don't you tell us a bit about some of your preeminent stakeholders and what's at stake in these key relationships? Michael, you want to take this one?
Sure, I'll go first on this one. So I guess at the top I would say, and you'll both appreciate this comment, that all of our stakeholders are preeminent, right? So we certainly value the relationships that we have with all of our public, private, and institutional organizations and leaders within our region because, you know, the shepherding an economy and quality of life and placemaking in a major metropolitan region is a team sport. It has to be based on the involvement and engagement and action of all of these sectors together and hopefully somewhat aligned on the same priorities within the region, and that's where the importance of these stakeholders plays such a huge role. So, you know, when I think of public sector stakeholder, preeminent stakeholders, clearly, if you think about the mayors of large cities, the county commissions who control the significant resources that counties have within for their responsibilities of infrastructure, of social services, of education, of all the key elements of competitiveness of a region. So preeminent stakeholders on the public side would certainly be those leaders of government. On the private sector side, you know, our economy is fortunate that we have such a diversified economic base in the Minneapolis-St. Paul region. Certainly people know us for food and agriculture, where we have 6 of the top 30 food and ag businesses headquartered in the world, 6 of the top 30 in the world headquartered in our region. No other region in America has more than one, or actually globally has more than one of those top 30 food and ag. So we certainly, companies you would imagine like General Mills and Cargill, these are huge stakeholders for us in the ag sector. In the med tech sector, of course, we have the Mayo Clinic, we have Medtronic, St. Jude Medical. So these are very important stakeholders that have a lot of both industry influence as well as, I would say, probably political imprimatur as far as leading their industries. And then in the institutional sector, for us, it would be the major foundations like like Bob's organization. We have equivalent organizations in our region, such as our community foundations, but we also have private foundations like the McKnight Foundation, where we have very, very close relationships, and the president and CEO of that McKnight Foundation is on my executive committee. So, by seeing the names that I'm bringing up, you can tell the importance of those kinds of organizations that really give us a lot of credibility if we are in keeping them engaged and excited about what we're doing. And so Bob, then you probably have a little bit different preeminent stakeholder scenarios there, so why don't you follow on?
Sure. It was interesting to hear your comments and to think a little bit about how we define stakeholders. I would go back to our mission statement, which really has these 3 core pieces, which is providing leadership on key community issues, building community endowment, and addressing needs through grant making. And I would say we have stakeholders in all 3. So in our leadership role, the foundation is a significant leader on lots of issues. So our president and CEO and our board members represent us in important issues like how this community prepares this summer for the Republican National Convention being in Cleveland, and how kind of new leaders are attracted to the community, and important issues around governmental funding and other significant issues. We obviously have strong stakeholders on the fundraising side. A community foundation is not a static organization. It continues to grow through engaging donors in addressing community needs, and we're really fortunate that the Cleveland community continues to support us. We've been averaging about $50 million a year in new assets into the foundation, so that's $500 million over a decade, and those relationships are important. We need to continue to get Clevelanders to believe in the future of this community and to be willing to invest in the future of this community going forward. And of course, everything we do on the grant-making side is about stakeholders. Our reputation is entirely built by the nonprofits we fund. We only provide the money. They provide the leadership and the commitment and the drive to make Cleveland a better community, and it's important that we nurture the relationships with our grantees in a way that they feel valued. We like to talk much more about partnering than having grantees, so that technically it is a grant relationship, but we want an open and candid relationship with all of the people we fund so that we can be helpful to them, not just with money, but with ideas and with an ability to help them do the best work they can with our support.
So Doug, this is Michael again. I'm going to jump in and actually not only validate, I think, but really support what Bob just said, because in our case, in the contrast of these organizations, it's interesting that as I mentioned, foundations are one of the funders of a partnership like ours that is tasked with creating and maintaining prosperity and growth of our economy in our regions. And so what's at stake in these stakeholder relationships is exactly what he said, is that if we are engaging our foundation community successfully and showing the value that we are adding to the region's economy, then they are more prone to want to invest in us as one of their stakeholders, to provide us resources to do the work that we need to do, because ultimately our outcome desires are the same. We both want our communities to be a better place, to be more prosperous and effective as a place to live, work, and raise a family. So very much synergistic with these two organizations.
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Let's move to our last topic within the framework of stakeholder relations. Both of your very distinguished nonprofits have a number of stakeholders you've talked about, and as we all know, it's not easy to build and maintain really high-stakes relationships over a long period. It takes a lot of effort. Why don't you share some of what you've learned about building and maintaining relationships? What are some of the tricks of the trade, if you will, in the area of stakeholder relations that have enabled you to build really solid relationships? And Bob, you want to lead off on this one?
Sure, and it's a great question, Doug. I guess I would begin by saying that I'm not sure there are that many tricks of the trade. I think that stakeholder relationships is at the core of the work we do, and it is in many ways the work we do. We could not accomplish any of our mission without the stakeholders, and so we spend a lot of time talking about stakeholder relationships. Maybe we don't use that language, but really trying to instill in our staff the fact that everything we do is based upon partnering. We partner with community leaders to address issues in the community. We can't do it alone. We partner with donors, donors who care about Cleveland, but look to us to provide them with assistance in their charitable work, to bring to them ideas that they might not otherwise find, and to connect them to other donors who share the same passion. So our kind of internal slogan is turning purpose into passion. So it's kind of like, having people who really care. And obviously with our grantees, we focus a lot on the stakeholder relationships. And there we talk a lot about openness and transparency and building a culture where we recognize the power differential sometimes between the funder and the grantee. And it's really incumbent upon us to try to reduce that, to avoid issues that suggest that we have the knowledge because we have the money, but to recognize that in many cases the knowledge rests someplace else, and that we need to be totally transparent with our grantees to really have an effective partnership. So it's not so much tricks as it is building it into the core culture of the organization, I believe, and really recognizing that I think, and I'm sure that Michael will agree, that you can't really accomplish your mission without a strong focus on who the stakeholders are. But Michael, I don't want to put words in your mouth, and would love to hear your thoughts on this question.
Well, I'm sitting here nodding my head up and down with everything you just said about the importance of building those relationships and maintaining those relationships with stakeholders. I'll draw a little bit of a contrast and talk a little bit about some tactics around a stakeholder engagement and relationships. And so first of all, I think from my perspective, where, our stakeholder relationships are ever renewed. If we're not producing results on an annual basis on how our economy is moving forward, are we creating new investments and jobs, then I have we have the challenge of maintaining those stakeholder relationships. If a company, for instance, doesn't think we're getting the job done, or if we're not meeting their expectations, then we have a potential of losing them as a stakeholder. So first of all, tactically, constant communications with our stakeholders is really important. So I do a CEO newsletter to all of our investors and stakeholders at least once a month, usually 2 or 3 times a month, giving them fresh information on what's happening, what are some of the economic issues we're facing in the region, what are some of the success stories that we're seeing with new companies that are entering our market and building facilities, creating new jobs. So we keep the information flow to our investors and stakeholders extremely current. So just communications, but communications is not enough. People will get desensitized over time with communications. So the second tier of our stakeholder relationship strategy would be engagement, and that is getting them actually involved in our project activities. So for instance, most of every region in the country today is facing challenges and even shortages now as the economy now is expanding again with talented workers, with the workers and human capital that have the skills and abilities to take the jobs of the future and really help companies grow. And so as we recognized in our region the challenge that we need more talented workers, we engaged our stakeholders, some of our key stakeholders from our government agencies, from our businesses, and from our institutions, and brought them together around an initiative for the retention and attraction of talent to our region, and made it an imperative for our stakeholders to be at that table and be a part of that. So those are the kinds of engagement. One example of an engagement strategy that's been very successful for us. And, meet with them individually as well. I mean, I think, and one of my techniques as CEO is I make it an effort to meet with every key stakeholder group at least once a year. And when you have hundreds, that's not an easy thing to accomplish. But I think it's really important that you have specific one-on-one time with their leadership to ensure that those relationships are strong and continue to be mutually beneficial. Well, so that kind of ends up kind of where I stand on that one.
Let me ask a closing question. I'm assuming that both of you spend a fair amount of time on what we're calling stakeholder relations management. How much time would you say on the average you spend? Bob?
Well, I guess I would say that I probably spend 60% of my time on internal stakeholder relations, which I know is not the focus of this call, but I would include in that relations with our board as well as internal staff relations, because staff are important internal stakeholders.
Right.
And probably 40% of my time is kind of on external, so really being out in the community, listening to the community, having kind of an open ear from a variety of sources of what's happening in Cleveland and kind of where our stakeholders are in terms of their relationships with us and with other important organizations in the community as well.
And you, Michael?
Well, I think I might just flip that one and say I'm probably 40% internal stakeholder and obviously managing and leading the organization itself, the board and the internal staff. I would say mine is maybe probably 60% external stakeholders and spending a lot of time essentially not only building those relationships but maintaining them and essentially showing our work, getting out there and talking about what is actually happening with our economy, educating the stakeholders on trends and analysis for where we're headed in the future. And but they're obviously both, the balance, and Doug, you've talked about this in many of your books and writings in the past, is this balancing point between external and internal for CEOs, and I continue to think about those learnings as we try to continually improve our organization every day.
Well, great. Folks, you've heard from two distinguished nonprofit leaders on the very important subject of stakeholder relations, Bob Eckardt of the Cleveland Foundation, Cleveland, Ohio, Michael Langley, the Minneapolis-St. Paul Regional Economic Development Partnership. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your contribution to ExtraordinaryCEO.com. And have a great day.